Between the Eagles and Chargers, there were 8 turnovers, 3 of which happened on one play, 8 sacks, 13 penalties, 5 injuries, a missed field goal, and a stiff arm with a broken hand. I'm not saying these teams played amazing, they didn't, but you cannot say that they didn't put on a show. Hello and welcome back to the Chargers Check-In. My name is Cecilia, here to walk you through this thrilling win, and if you're an Eagles fan, I'm sorry, because neither team deserved to win that game. Seriously, neither team deserved a win. But one of them would come down with it, and of course it would be the team with the one man who did deserve a win, and that was Justin Herbert. What a performance. This is one of those games that is going to tell you the difference between the people who watch the games and the people who read the box score, because that was an unbelievable performance from Justin Herbert. We're going to get into all that and more. Please like and subscribe if you like what you see today. The way I'm going to do this is I'm going to talk through all the positives and then all the negatives. So if you just want to celebrate the win with me, then let's go through all these positive things and you can leave before we get into the negatives, because there are quite a few negatives here. All right, starting with the positives. Number one, that was a Harbaugh style win, right? A close game, everything is going wrong, and nothing seems reliable. Is the team still in it? Is their heart still in it? Are they still with the belief, even the irrational belief, that they can win? And the answer is a resounding yes. So in that sense, this is a Harbaugh win. I have issues with a lot of the coaching in this game, but what I don't have an issue with is the culture, because the culture is there. This is a team that would take a bullet for Herbert, and he is right there with them. Listen to Tony Jefferson talk about his quarterback, and listen to what Justin Herbert has to say about the toughness of his teammates.
I seen him like stiff arm somebody with the hand too. Like, he's just a warrior, and as a defender, like, he makes you just want to play harder. You know, knowing the guy under the center over there got surgery one day and was back out in the practice field like in 2 days. It shows a lot. It shows how much he cares. You know, he could have did a different route and said, I'm gonna let it heal, but he wanted to be out there with us, so that makes us want to go even harder.
You know, the amount of respect and love that we have for each other. You know, we go play for each other, and it makes it so much better for us as a team, you know, when you enjoy playing with the guys that you're with. And a lot of guys are going through a lot of things, and so, you know, like you said, I draw a lot of inspiration from those guys, and, you know, hopefully, you know, I can have an impact on them, and I think when we're able to do that, we're playing our best football.
This team loves him, and Justin Herbert didn't have a great game overall. I'm not here to say that he did, but he did not let that stop him from taking control at the end of the game and making that last drive happen with his legs. He did it himself. He looked around at that offense and thought, the receivers aren't doing it for me, the tight ends aren't doing it for me, the offensive line sure isn't doing it for me, the running backs aren't doing it for me, I'm going to do it myself. And he did. In that final drive, he ran the ball several times, including deciding not to hand the ball off on a designed run, causing Jalen Phillips to lose sight of the ball and completely lose contain on the right side. He escaped so much pressure, was so aware in the pocket, especially in that first half. He found open receivers when there were not many in this game. The Eagles secondary did a fantastic job, and of course they did. Cooper DeJean, Quinyon Mitchell, they got Marcus Epps back. That secondary was rolling, and the only real way to stop them was for Justin Herbert to use his legs. On a day where he had a broken hand, he obviously was in a tremendous amount of pain, and we'll get into the injuries that happened later, but what toughness to decide, I see an opening, I can take it, and he did. And I know to some people it's like, well, of course he did. It is not a given for great athletes to also be great competitors, to also have great toughness. That is not a given. And so I don't take that for granted about Justin Herbert. This is a player who was tackled 17 times in this game. I'm not talking about getting hit. Obviously, he got hit a lot. We saw all those pressures. But he got tackled 17 times in this game. Obviously was in a lot of pain, started handing the ball off with just one hand instead of both. And yet he took off and ran. And like I said, we saw that stiff arm, such toughness shown on that last drive. You know, stiff arming a guy just to get a few extra yards because you know yards are hard to come by. Pure instincts, will to win. He was not holding himself back. Not an easy thing to do when you're injured. It's hard when you're injured to not automatically compensate at a subconscious level. It takes a lot of awareness to be able to push past that. So Chargers fans should be extremely happy with how Herbert played. Like I said, no one else on offense played well. You know, maybe Jamari Sawyer, arguably Zion, you know, the running backs started hot. They got all the yards on that opening drive and they looked really good, right? But at the end of the game, Herbert was the lead rusher. Herbert is the win condition. As long as Herbert is on the field and the game is reasonably close, Justin Herbert can pull it off. Listen to this. When NFL quarterbacks have been sacked 5 or more times this year, they are 9-38 because that is hard to overcome. Justin Herbert is 4-0. And obviously, that's also a team stat. So let's talk about the defense and what Jesse Minter and his guys did, because Jesse Minter's defense looking better after the bye is real. You know, if you looked at last week and you thought, yeah, but it's the Raiders, that's totally fine. I totally understand that. But the secondary, the chemistry is back. There was a stretch of this season where you didn't really feel like the chemistry that they had last year, that they depended so much on to outperform their roster. You know, there was a time when it didn't really feel like they had it this year. That has been resolved. They did not look confused or disjointed. I love the variety. They flipped their reputation as a zone-heavy team, and it creates these turnover opportunities by running man, throwing quarterbacks off 2 weeks in a row now with an interception where a corner breaks up a pass and Tony Jefferson is right there to catch it. That's incredible. It is so unlikely that it happens once. I cannot believe it happened twice, to the point where I know that this is something that they're having conversations about. The way these defensive backs flock to the ball once it's out of the quarterback's hand is such a credit to Jesse Minter. That is something that they work on. Like, they call it burst to ball. They work on that all preseason. They clearly emphasize it throughout the season, and it shows. You know, this is a team with a lot of missed tackles, but they still don't give up a lot of yards. They still don't give up a lot of points, because when one guy misses, there's always someone else right there. You know, especially when it happens up front. They never assume other guys are going to be able to make the play, and they are there to back each other up, and it shows, man. Jalen Hurts had 2 interceptions on the season going into this game, which is a phenomenal number of interceptions to limit that to. He left this game with 6 on the season. That is such a credit to this defense. Dante Jackson is turning into a top 5 corner in this league, which I remember when he was signed, no one expected that. I'm not going to say that I expected that. Dante Jackson looks awesome in this defense. Cam Hart is getting more and more reliable every week. He's playing a lot smarter. He's always the physical guy, but the level of awareness to get his hand on the ball and be able to hit it up is just absolutely incredible. I love seeing these late round picks thrive under Jesse Minter. Derwin James is so good at getting those tackles for loss on running plays. He comes from the line, lined up on the edge, gets around the outside, and runs across the line, because at that point, the running back isn't factoring him in because they're like, well, I'm running on the other side, right? Well, if you take just a split-second hesitation, Derwin James will be right there. So he looked a bit like 2024 Derwin in the run game, which was awesome to see. Defensive line had a solid game overall. You don't get 4 interceptions without pressure. They got pressure on 42% of dropbacks, which is great. Obviously, you know, I had said in my live stream, like, I feel like, you know, they could have gotten more sacks. It didn't really feel like the defensive line was in it. When I went back and watched the film, I stand corrected, because the defensive line was absolutely in it. Sure, they only got 1 sack. They weren't able to convert in that sense. But like I said, these interceptions, they deserve credit for that too. Absolutely. And Minter has been in his bag with these blitzes. Dropping tackles into coverage has succeeded 2 weeks in a row. It will force quarterbacks to be ready for any combination of rushers on the line. And by dropping these guys unexpectedly into coverage, these quarterbacks aren't even looking for them. Quarterbacks have to process so much information. They are not seeing a defensive lineman who starts by taking a couple steps forward and then drops back. It is incredible, the effectiveness that it has. And now that it's been shown on tape, I think it's going to make quarterbacks hesitate to go to their easy option, to go to the running back or tight end who's right there behind the defensive line. It's going to make them a little more nervous to do that, because they have to look for a guy dropping into coverage. And it also increases the opportunity for creativity. Who is going to drop into coverage? You have no idea. Is there going to be delay pressure? They're starting to run stunts really well. The defensive line looked really good. Odafe Owe and Khalil Mack had 6 pressures each. Owe obviously also got a sack. His total for the year is looking better and better. Thule got 2 hits on Hurts and 4 pressures. Tarheeb Steele, Derwin James, Troy Dye, they all got in on the action. Like I said, they weren't able to close it into sacks as often as I'd have liked, but the impact is so important. That last interception, the one that won the game, mind you, would not have been possible without Mack forcing Jalen to throw and pulling off that play when the Eagles were marching down the field, had all the momentum. You know, a penalty on 4th down that, you know, maybe there's an argument that it shouldn't have been called, but that's such a momentum killer. But the defense had his back. I think it shows a lot of focus, a lot of resilience, and, you know, Thule has taken such a big step forward this year. Here's what Khalil Mack had to say about Thule's increasing leadership role ahead of Monday's game.
Yeah, you can always see his thought process. His mind was churning, but the words weren't coming out yet. And so the words are coming out with it now. And so it's always been there. He's always been a leader. But he matriculated and his thought process was that me and Joey and Derwin were the guys to be vocal leaders. But now he's stepping into that role himself, just understanding, no, man, you earned your right to speak up and be the voice when we need it. You know what I mean?
There were some great run stops in the interior, including a goal line stop from Tier Tart that was absolutely huge. Just a masterclass on handling double coverage, shooting the gap, and getting penetration. The Eagles were just running into a brick wall up the middle at times, and it really messed with their first half game plan. You know, there's a reason it was such a low scoring first half. They could not get anything going up the middle, and they had to go outside. And, you know, going outside, sometimes that'll be really successful. You saw the fake tush push, Saquon able to turn that into a really impressive play. But, you know, when you can't go up the middle, you don't have anything reliable. It also results in tackles for loss, which we also saw. So give Jesse Minter his flowers for this game, man. The entire defense played physical, fast, cohesive football. They really looked like they were playing as a unit. Here's Tony Jefferson talking about his defensive coordinator and the chemistry he has with his fellow teammates.
You always seem to be at the right place at the right time.
Shout out Minter, Jesse Minter, just calling the right call. That's where it starts first, is the call, and then executions after that. I've been having some visions, like that's so Raven. Like last night we were talking, me and the corners, and you could ask Cam, I literally spoke this one to an existence. I told him, tip me the ball, I'll be there, and it just so happened to be that.
Briefly on special teams, Cameron Dicker obviously lights out. He is so reliable, and a field goal was the difference. One team had a missed field goal, the other team didn't. You know, you have to give him a lot of credit, and, you know, we're getting to the point where he absolutely should be in that Pro Bowl, right? There's really no question about it at this point. He, right now, is the most accurate kicker in the NFL. And obviously that can change throughout the season. He's not the only great kicker, but he really has solidified himself as a top 3 kicker in this league. Also on special teams, Delshon Phillips, want to highlight him. He made 3 good tackles on returns in an otherwise pretty bad game for that unit. So he really, you know, he saw a unit struggling and he showed up and played really well. His first tackle was so tough, man, so physical. Got the guys around him really hyped. Love to see it. Some good things on offense. I liked the opening drive a lot. Amarian Hampton is back, and he looks really good. I've been really complimentary of Kamani Vidal, and I will continue to be. But seeing Amarian Hampton back is like, oh, right, that's what a first-round pick looks like. Right, that I forgot. We have, you know, someone who was in that conversation with Ashton Genty as a generational running back talent, and I think he has what it takes to be the best running back in this league. Obviously, he was on a snap count. Didn't get to see as much of him as I would have liked, but him being back is so exciting for this team. I liked running out of 11 personnel in this matchup. Obviously, you saw the Bears very successful with that, so that's something the Chargers did early. You know, I like the use of the I formation, especially in the red zone. I think it's very underutilized in the NFL these days, and the Chargers have a lot to be proud of. The culture, the heart, the fight, the defense, the toughness, and above all, Justin Herbert's quiet but profound leadership on this team is absolutely astounding. A well-deserved win for Justin Herbert in this defense. So that is the victory celebration, right? We have a fantastic quarterback, an unbelievable kicker, you know, everything humming on defense getting hot at the right time. But I do need to talk about some of the really negative teams. I'm going to start with the injuries that happened. And, you know, I got to talk about Darius Davis went down with an ankle injury, and he did not have a good game. Ahead of that, you saw Hassan Haskins come in for him. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But that injury is something to keep an eye on. He wasn't able to return. So Herbert was able to play through both games. He started out using both his hands, playing under center, which none of us dared to predict because we didn't want to get our hopes up. It sounds like he wasn't able to do that at practice at all. But then, you know, in the day leading up to the game, he was able to get some of those snaps off, and so he felt comfortable doing it early on. But he took enough hits that you could see him get more and more uncomfortable with it throughout the game. So that's something we have to look out for this week, is now that the adrenaline has died down, what's the status of Herbert's hand going forward? Trey Pipkins went down early. It looked really bad. He had to be helped off the field. Looked like he was in a lot of pain. Bobby Hart came in for him. Derwin went out with an injury. He got hit by Justin Eboigbe in traffic. Evaluated for a head injury, but he was able to return, so that's always a good thing. And I think with a head injury, the main thing you're looking at is there any kind of neck pain, and is this a concussion risk? And clearly, if it were a concussion risk, I don't think he would have went back in the game. And so the only thing we're really looking out for is him on the injury report with some sort of neck or sore upper back injury. So hopefully he'll be all right because he was able to play the rest of the game. And finally, Elijah Molden was ruled out with a hamstring. He had made a tackle, and you could see on the broadcast he's kind of reaching for his hamstring, so he went out and was not able to return. That's the bad news on the injury front. Definitely a lot to look out for on the injury report this week. Okay, now in terms of the bad things that were in the Chargers' control, there are some management errors that I don't love. I did praise Harbaugh earlier for the culture. I think he deserves a lot of credit, but I don't love the frequency with which the defense takes timeouts. They took a timeout with a minute and a half left, and then they had to call another one, so then they only had one timeout. That's the kind of thing that over the course of a season can add up, and I think it is starting to add up. The Chargers haven't had a whole lot of 2-minute drills to end the first half that they've had all their timeouts for. And I think that makes a big difference, especially with Cameron Dicker being so reliable from above 50 yards. You know, that could end up being points on the board in some games, and I don't love that. You also see it on the offense at times. It's not just a defense thing, but considering, you know, how cohesively this defense is playing overall, it still baffles me that we get some of these timeouts. Definitely all right with one timeout per half going to, hey, this is a bad look. It's an important play on 3rd down or 2nd and long or something. I understand. You know, we saw that in the Raiders in the red zone. Bad matchup with Brock Bowers one-on-one. Yeah, you call the timeout. It's not that it should never happen, but I don't love the frequency with which it happens. The play calling was pretty conservative this week. Last week they were a little more aggressive with it. They had a chance on 4th down in the 4th quarter to treat it like 4-down territory, to go for it on 4th down. They didn't take it. They were in the middle of the field, so it's iffy, but you know, it's one of those things where if you look at the previous play call, yeah, maybe instead of passing it and going for a big play, you do something that you know is going to get you 2 yards, and maybe it gets you 3 yards, maybe it gets you the first down, but now you're in 4-down territory where, yeah, 4th and 4, I probably wouldn't have gone for it either with Justin Herbert's state and how poorly the run game was going at that point. But had they treated it like 4-down territory before, they probably would have had that option. So that was a little bit disappointing. 7 penalties for 55 yards. They ended the game with more penalties than the Eagles. The Eagles had 6. It's not horrible, but the fact that 4 came from the offensive line alone, that's not great. You know, add that to the pile on top of the worst position group on the team. We will certainly get to the offensive line. And I think that those penalties would have been enough to cost them the game if the Eagles didn't also get 53 penalty yards, which often came at really important times. It feels like the Eagles are a team where when they get momentum and everything is going right and they have their opportunities, that's when the penalties come. You know, I don't know if it's a lack of discipline, lack of focus that can happen when the moments get big and the stadium gets loud and all that, but the Chargers did get a little lucky this game that the Eagles just, you know, couldn't live up to the moment in that sense and got a lot of those penalties. All that could be better, but all of the things I just said pales in comparison to the 2 worst aspects of this game, both of which came on the offensive side: Greg Roman's plan and play calling, and the offensive line's performance. I'm going to start with the performance because that is just a compilation of a bunch of bad individual performances from the offensive linemen. We're going to start with all of your favorites. Bradley Bozeman. I think this was a new all-time worst game. You know, I want you to take a look at these images ahead of this snap. You have 2 rushers on the right, 2 on the left. The guy's lined up as a 3 technique, left of Zion, and you have Nakobe Dean, linebacker on the Eagles, showing a clear indication that he is going to blitz as well. Sure, there's a chance that he drops back into coverage. The Eagles have been blitzing all game. We know that that's what they wanted to do. So Nakobe Dean is right in front of Bozeman's face. So who does Bozeman block? Well, he blocks the 3 technique and leaves Kamani Vidal to try to block the free rusher. And obviously Kamani Vidal gets beat. He wasn't even touched before, and he got all this momentum. Kamani Vidal, obviously much smaller than him. Vidal's usually solid in pass protection, but Vidal probably thought he'd get at least a chip, a hand, something to slow down the momentum and give Vidal the advantage. You know, give Vidal a chance to get low, get in front of him. Instead, he only has time to step in front of him and get run over. This play, by the way, is the Justin Herbert fumble. That is the impact of Bradley Bozeman, you know, and he didn't have a good game other than that. He also had a penalty. He couldn't run block to save his life. Nothing was working up the middle. And he's right next to Zion, who's the best run blocker on the team. That's on him. And yet, that was not the worst performance on the offensive line. Would you believe that? One of Bradley Bozeman's worst games was not the worst performance on the offensive line because Mekhi Becton had something to say. He allowed 8 pressures and 1 sack. From the guard position, that's crazy. Okay? Keep in mind that this Eagles team was a below average team in sacks going into this game. So you can't say, well, the defensive front. No, it was not the Broncos, okay? It was not the Giants. It was not the Texans. This is just what NFL teams are like. Sometimes they blitz. When your quarterback's hurt, yeah, they're going to blitz. I do not understand Mekhi Becton somehow allowing 8 pressures from the interior. Now, you may look at the stats and say, well, Bobby Hart also allowed 8 pressures. Yeah, and that's really bad. But to do that from the interior is way worse of a performance. It is harder to block as a tackle. That, you guys all know that. There's a reason that left tackle is a premium position and right tackle is barely below that, right? Because as a guard, you have guys to your left and right. They are usually lined up closer to you. They're usually not the guys with all of the pass rush moves. They're bigger, a little bit slower. And when you allow pressure in the interior like Becton did, it makes it really hard for a quarterback to escape. And Justin Herbert had a hard time escaping in this game. So Mekhi Becton, by far, had the worst performance. And, Trey Pipkins got a penalty, played relatively poorly, and then he got hurt. What's new? Is what it is. Like I said, Bobby Hart didn't have a great game. Jamari Sawyer allowed 5 pressures, but he did look really good in the run game. And, he was sometimes the target of these blitzes. I'm fine with that. Obviously, I don't love it. But if the Chargers were to just cut Mekhi Becton right now, I wouldn't be that mad. Foster Sarell has not been this bad at his worst, and that is, how deep in the depth chart did Foster Sarell start out? How likely did we think that it was that Foster Sarell would be a starter at any point, And this combined with Greg Roman's poor protection plan allowed a 66% pressure rate on Justin Herbert. That is unheard of levels of pressure, unbelievably bad levels of pressure. It is impressive when teams get to 40%. Like I said, the Chargers defensive line got to 42%, and that was like, hey, that's a really good game from the Chargers defensive line. Good on them. Some good blitzes, good plan from Jesse Minner. The Eagles defensive line and their plan to get after Justin Herbert resulted in 66% pressure rate. Herbert has been hit more times, pressured more times, and quick pressured more times than any other quarterback in the league. He does not have the most sacks, and I give him some credit for that. He has the 3rd most sacks. But we have to talk about Greg Roman's protection plan, because somehow, with all this, knowing how this season is going, how hurt Herbert is coming off of a hand surgery and playing a week later, somehow the conclusion that Greg Roman comes to is to have no quick passing game, very little run game after an extremely successful opening drive that depended on both running backs to get all of the 80 yards that it took, abandon the play action, which had been a staple of this offense ahead of the bye, only to bring it back when they had no timeouts and under 2 minutes left to play, when it would be its most ineffective because nobody believed that they were going to run. What are we doing? What are we doing? And all this against a team with extremely good corners and solid safeties, and they still can't get someone open for Justin Herbert on the 1st or 2nd level, ahead of 15 yards out, where Justin Herbert can throw it quickly. And I won't hear any argument that these receivers aren't good enough. This is a really good receiving core. The routes that he had Ladd running against the best slot corner in the league were so basic, so simple and predictable that they basically depended on Ladd just outrunning Cooper DeJean. Why? Cooper DeJean is very fast, very quick and athletic, great with his hands. Like I said, he's one of the best in the league. You need to let Ladd mix him up a little bit, right? Ladd can out-juke just about anybody, and it would have been really cool to see him try to out-juke Cooper DeJean. That would have been an awesome matchup. Instead, Greg Roman gave him nothing on these routes, and Ladd cannot afford, when he is running deep into the middle of the field, he cannot afford to take a lot of time to hit his marks because Justin Herbert doesn't have a lot of time. And so there's just nothing that Ladd can do. What a waste of Ladd's elite athleticism. Herbert needed better options to throw to than anyone covered by Cooper DeJean, let alone an athletic player who doesn't get to use it. Running mesh into zone, getting QJ and Keenan both taken out by press coverage because they were lined up too close to each other, considering that they weren't running in different directions, no bootleg calls to get Herbert into space where he can't be blindsided. The most interesting play call in the whole game that Greg Roman had was a jet sweep to Trey Harris for like a few yards. That was as creative as it got. Herbert finally got an easy option a few times. I will say that with Kamani or Amarion blocking and then being open right away, it did save them a few times in the first half. So you'd think the lesson would be, wow, pressure's really coming, and being able to throw the ball right away is really saving us. They're blitzing a lot. Let's get guys open right away. Let's throw it over the blitz. We have good yards after the catch receiver, in QJ, in Trey Harris especially, even Ladd at times. So you'd think that would be the direction that they go. And to be fair, QJ did not have a good game. QJ wasn't able to break any tackles. Marcus Epps, kind kind of was able to do whatever he wanted, but the game calling was just awful. And, we never got to see Trey Lance on those short yardage packages that we talked about with 3rd and inches. Can we fake a handoff, an RPO, QB sneak with Trey Lance, maybe a tight end in there, because they were never in 3rd and inches. It felt like it was always 3rd and long, whether it was because of penalties or because they're just relentlessly trying to pass the ball after the run game was working. If that doesn't work, and it didn't because Eagles secondary played amazing, they had these guys locked up, yeah, you're going to be in a lot of 3rd and longs. And so we never got to see what could have been some really interesting play calls. And also these 3rd and inches, 4th and inches are a strength of the Chargers offense, and it's disappointing that they didn't even get to use it. Their screen game has been really bad, so they couldn't depend on that, despite having, like I said, some of the best yards after catch receivers, and I would say the best blocking wide receiver unit in the league. Sanjay Lal has these guys locked in on blocking the guy in front of them. It is incredible. There is no weak point among wide receivers blocking, and yet they can't make screens work. You just have to look at Greg Roman. When the players individually are capable of something, and then you're not able to do it well in the game, you have to look at coaching. Greg Roman had a bad plan. He made the wrong adjustments, had a quarterback with a broken hand end up as the lead rusher in the game, Justin Herbert, with 66 yards, outpacing, I believe, it was Hampton who had yards in the 50s and Vidal in the 40s, or maybe it was reversed. Neither of them were able to pass Justin Herbert's yards. When things work, he abandons them. When they don't work, he doesn't adequately adjust. If they had an average quarterback instead of Justin Herbert, an average quarterback, they would have lost this game by over a touchdown. 3 turnovers ahead of overtime, okay? Put overtime aside. 3 turnovers. How many points should you score? The answer is not 19. It should be way higher than that. You should have 30. How many chances do you need to score, and how many times are you going to fail? He failed Justin Herbert. He failed his running backs. He failed his offensive line, who went and failed him right back, so what are you going to do? And I have to question, to what extent is Greg Roman in the hot seat with Jim Harbaugh, because this was an unbelievably bad plan, and Jim Harbaugh cannot be okay with Justin Herbert taking the beating coming off of surgery. After the Jacksonville game, we saw Harbaugh, really being willing to say, we have to make adjustments. These were bad play calls. He even alluded to the scheme not working well and not being great. And obviously after this game, he wasn't going to get pressed on that because they won, and ultimately the story was the defense and the story was Justin Herbert, and that makes sense. But because he was willing to acknowledge some of Greg Roman's struggles in the past, I do believe that Greg Roman is probably on the hot seat for him. It's hard to fire somebody with all of the injuries going on and all that the offensive line has had to overcome, but the protection plan in this game, in my opinion, was the most egregious that it has been. So that's that on the offense. A lot of bad stuff. Like I said, Justin Herbert didn't have a very good game, but he showed the fight that very, very, very few quarterbacks could have shown, and he did still have a few throws that I'm sitting there like, yeah, your average quarterback's not making that. It takes a top 10 quarterback to make that throw, and even then, not all of them can throw across their body, across the field, running the opposite direction and hit their guys in stride. So Justin Herbert bails out Greg Roman once again. Real quick, we do have to talk about the special teams. They cannot tackle outside of Delshon Phillips, who, like I said, hey, he had a great game. Love to see it, right? He had an awesome performance. Darius Davis looks really bad, to the point where I wonder if they stick to Haskins or Ladd from now on, especially with the injuries that Davis has had this season. He can't stay on the field, and then he's not performing well when he is. He had that return for negative 10 yards because, he really wanted to make something happen because he was playing so badly, right? When you play badly, it makes it worse because you get desperate, and he was playing desperate, and, he decides to run east-west instead of north-south, and that's just what happens. If it weren't for this elite field goal unit with Josh Harris, J.K. Scott, and Cameron Dicker, I would say Ryan Ficken should probably be on the hot seat, right there next to Roman. But, Ryan Ficken has a much more proven track record than Greg Roman does. And like I said, that field goal unit looks fantastic. And you got to give him some credit for that. The blocking has also been great on that unit. So that is what it is. Special teams was not the problem in this game, but they certainly weren't contributing to the winning outcome. Those are my thoughts on the game. I really want to know all of your thoughts because there was so much to unpack. That was one of the most entertaining and stressful games I've watched in a long time. This was a huge win. Moving to 9-4, looking at the playoff picture, they have a real opportunity this next week against the Chiefs, because after that, it gets way harder, you know, against some of the defensive lines that they're going to have to go up against. So hopefully Herbert is able to recover. Keep an eye on the injury report. There's a lot to look for this week. I also want to thank everyone who joined me on the live stream after the game. That was a lot of fun. The previous week, I was mostly focusing on getting all the information out and just reacting, but had a really fun time with the chat this time as well. So that's up if you want to rewatch the VOD there. And above all, thank you to my new members. I haven't really promoted this much, but some of you guys just saw the join button and jumped right on. I'm going to go ahead and put all of my members' names on the screen because it's supposed to be at a certain tier you get your name on the screen, but I really appreciate people jumping in on that when I haven't really even talked about that. So if you want to have your name at the end of the video, if you want early access to draft content, if you want access to all my game day notes that don't always, you know, make the cut for the video, just because there's so much, you can join membership as well. And if you just want to support the channel, that's a great way to do it. I really, really appreciate those who have. And in the off season, the memberships are gonna go pretty crazy with all the draft content because I'm really excited for the Chargers options next year. I'll be back to preview the Chiefs game later this week. Like I said, this is a huge opportunity for the Chargers, who are somehow 9-4 at this point. And the playoff push is in full force. If the Chargers win next week, they might, depending on how things fall, they might be able to officially eliminate the Chiefs from playoff contention, which I know a lot of you would be very excited about. So like and subscribe if you've liked what you've seen today. My name is Cecilia. This has been the Chargers Check-In. Thanks for being here.